What if your brainwaves could unlock doors, sign documents, and protect your most sensitive information without ever touching a keypad or fingerprint scanner? Welcome to a mind-bending episode of Neurocareers Doing the Impossible, hosted by me, Milena Korostenskaja, or simply Dr. K, your Neurocareers coach and guide into the world of Neurotech. Today, I'm delighted to interview Dr. Violeta Tulceanu, a pioneering researcher from KU Leuven, Belgium, who stands at the forefront of brainwave authentication and neurotechnology security. In this episode, we dive deep into a world where your thoughts could become the next frontier in cybersecurity. But here's the kicker. What if your brain password revealed more than just your identity? What if it exposed secrets about your emotions, health, or even mental state? The stakes are incredibly high, and Violeta is here to unravel the fascinating and complex possibilities of using the human mind as a digital signature. Together, we'll discuss the career challenges she's encountered in this cutting edge field, explore the ethical dilemmas of mind security, and tackle the technological hurdles of making brainwave authentication both reliable and secure. Violeta will also share her insights into the evolving world of neuroethics and the philosophical questions that arise when we treat thoughts as credentials. Prepare to be amazed and maybe a little unsettled as we journey into the thrilling and sometimes unnerving future of brain computer interfaces and digital security. Tune in to Neurocareers Doing the Impossible and join us as we unlock the secrets of the mind with Dr. Violeta Tulceanu. This episode is a must listen for anyone curious about the ever evolving intersection of neuroscience, technology, and cybersecurity. Welcome, Violeta. It's a great pleasure to have you on our podcast. Can you please introduce yourself and briefly tell where are you doing your research and maybe something about the university, the program that you are attending? So just brief introduction about yourself.
Well, as you can say, my name is Violeta Tulceanu. I am a researcher at KU Leuven in Belgium. It's a top research university in Europe. I'm working in a famous group called COSIC. I work with Professor Bart Preniel. COSIC is home to a lot of security projects. It's a cryptography department. It's a group that focuses on information security. We have a Master's of Information Security. We do a lot of exciting topics ranging from the more mathematical part to hardware security, to data protection, and to the more explorative side, which is mine. I am doing interdisciplinary research. So my background is information security, but apparently I have become a neuroscientist. So I work somewhere at the confluence between information security, artificial intelligence, and neuroscience with a little bit of dash of philosophy. It's an old place. It's from 1400s. It's a Gothic university. Somebody told me it looks like Hogwarts. So I come from a Gothic castle in a cloudy country with lots of chocolate.
That's beautiful description. Thank you. Where did this idea come from to connect information security, AI, with neuroscience and with that bit of philosophy?
I have had an unusual career path that I could not have suspected if anyone would have told me in my young scientist days that I would do what I have been doing. I would say absolutely not. This is unlikely. But I have had a career made of a long, long series of shocking coincidences and strange luck breaks. I started off as a normal computer scientist about 10 years ago, and I did an internship. It was about 2006, 2007. Back then, there were happening two elements in the world. One was the legislation allowing banks and big entities to be identity providers at the European level. Romania was entering various parts of the world. So it was aligning to the EU, it was aligning to NATO, it was aligning to every alignment. Also, in that year, there were the first papers published on using brainwaves as credentials. So during my internship, long story short, while working for a company that was working for the government, doing the identity provider integration projects, I started working on Brainwave Authentication and its integration with OpenID and single sign-on, meaning that for the already in practice things such as having an OpenID integrated with single sign-on, which is what you see now in every Gmail and Facebook and anything, we wanted a different type of credential, one that would guarantee liveness. So very well, it's you. Are you alive? Are you still there? And what else could you tell us about yourself? Because security-wise, biometry is a bit of a tricky topic. I think in some country in Africa, they were trying to introduce biometric authentication using fingerprint. The problem was that people were very creative, meaning that they chopped the fingers. So it was indeed the finger and the print, just without blood in it.
Greta, this is something that we see in the movies, but we cannot believe that that's true. Yes, chopping out fingers, taking out eyeballs. Yes, so
No, it was, I think, in the news. It's unfortunately real. It happens. No, of course, not as a standard practice. Probably there was the one creative person, but the idea is that a biometry can be bypassed. You can have a biometric without having the biometric tied to the person or to the continued presence of the person. So with the brain, you know that the person is there, that that they're in a right state of mind, and they are ready to act adequately, given that the resources that they access might be sensitive either to other people or to themselves. Think online banking, think online exams, especially with the pandemic and all. It would have been convenient to be able to do your exams very securely at home without thinking that your mother did it or somebody else. If you are in a high profile profession that requires that you make correct decisions, then very certainly we would like to know, have you taken some drug? Are you emotionally distressed either because of your private life or because your work environment has become toxic and there's bullying or abuse from your superiors, or simply the physical environment is challenging you to the point where your body is starting to affect your brain? Think infection, like if you are deployed in an area with infected water and you are drinking contaminated water, STDs that are undiagnosed and that people might not want to acknowledge, which also might affect your reasoning unwillingly. Then there is the neurodegeneracy. Simply get old, you might have Alzheimer, you might not be able to have a steady emotional state, and you can be taken advantage of. People can convince you to do something you might not normally want to do. And then there is very little proof because a person who is vulnerable will usually be surrounded by a few people. Those people have an extreme amount of power over your finances, over your assets. So brainwave authentication is around here. It can be used as a more simplistic tool, for instance, for online exams, where all we need to know is that you're you. For your grandmother, whom you've left with a caretaker and you do not want to see all the family assets transferred to the nurse or to some ruthless cousin. Or it could be your military personnel who would not like to be with PTSD or post torture or radicalized or brainwashed or drugged out or exhausted or intoxicated with some sort of substance they've ingested because I don't know what thing got contaminated. So this would be the area of what brainwave authentication is good for. It trickles from there into a lot of research. There have been a lot of attempts at actually doing brainwave authentication. Like I said, the first intentions happened in 2006, and we are in 2024, and people are still publishing papers on what might be brainwave authentication. And the reality is that, well, nobody has done it. There, as you can see, there is no such thing happening. There are attempts, there are intentions, but my strange background has happened guided a bit by the quest for this. As a young security expert, I had to learn about neurophysiology and psychology and neuroscience so that I could understand what exactly was I trying to measure. That's very nice. Of course, you need artificial intelligence because otherwise there is no classification. But where does philosophy come in? Well, knowledge. The field becomes increasingly complex. So, what I say is that the first thing that you need to define in order to talk about brainwave authentication is what is the credential? Authenticating with what exactly from your brain? With the hardware? That your brain is just a piece of hardware and that's the hardware. Well, no. Authenticating with movement. No, that's a bad idea because it does have stability. It has been proven that it works. But security-wise, it's like setting your password to 1234. Think navigation apps where you navigate using your brain. What do? Left, right, up, down? Well, you have just given your password a few million times in that app. Think of baselines. Baselines are unique as well. Are they stable? No. Will you find them in any application that a person using brainwaves will use? Indeed. The same goes for spelling type apps. You will be spelling, and it's not necessarily that you will be spelling maybe a word, you will be spelling the letter. So it will become possible to retrieve from the whatever ecosystem you are using. From other applications, you can reconstruct your password. So these are not exactly usable. Then what's left? What's left are concepts. Concepts are a good question. What concepts? Because if I tell you the word cup, there are a lot of cups in this world. And you could think of a plastic cup. You could think of a cup you saw in Mexico when you went on vacation. You could think of a coconut cup, or you can think of a porcelain cup, or it could be a Stanley cup. They're all cups. What cup? Is it going to be every time the same cup? Maybe. So here we start having mental mechanisms such as learning, forgetting, the heat of the data in your mind. So your current cup is whatever you're using. You might still remember the one in your childhood with the teddy bear. They're still there. So then again, you also might have a drawing of a cup. If the cup is simply an abstraction, how abstract will it still be your same cup? So all of these need to be determined. When you say that you want to use a concept for authentication, a brain print, then there's the fact that your brain is not a quiet place at all. It's filled with moods, it's filled with semantic connections, it's filled with emotion, and it might also be filled with AVCs, with post-trauma, with a lot of other things. So what I'm doing is I'm saying that it would be good to be able to authenticate using concepts, but these concepts need to be stable and well tested, both on a large population and over a sufficient amount of time, in order to be able to determine that indeed they are safe enough that you can use them to do banking, to sign over if you want to do assisted suicide. Because that's going to be a big decision. And we would like to know what cup you've been thinking of. Now, when we talk about brain prints, there are levels. The first one is the what for, the context, the what are we trying to do. Then there are the derived elements, such as how will you do the processing? Why would you use security? What for? What are the elements that are embedded in this brain print? Can you do predictive analysis on them? Can you classify the evolution of a mental condition? And finally, like, are concepts the final frontier? Should you authenticate using concepts at all? Could you simply authenticate with the fact that you are thinking, but it is a thought, it belongs to you, and it is a valid thought that comes out of your mind? This means that for a concept, for a memory, you have the standard paradigms where you have an evoked potential. But then again, I should know as a system what that evoked potential is. It's mapped. That means that security-wise, I know a lot of things about you. Would it be possible to simply identify this brain print as a thought of your brain that you can change without necessarily telling me what you've changed and how? But I can still identify you as being you. So that means that you identify through a word, through a thought that is invisible to me as your data authority. This is where philosophy comes in, because it means that I should identify that what's happening in your brain is language. It's valid language, it's not a baseline. And it still belongs to you, even though I do not have a full vocabulary of your every single piece of content in your mind. So this is another part that I explore.
Thank you so much, Violeta. So many valuable insights and so much new information that I think many of our listeners haven't heard yet. So can you specify, please, what does cryptography and security have to do with this topic that you just talked about?
Firstly, when you're talking about biometric authentication, I think it is obvious that the first thing you talk about is, do you have a credential or not? And I think in the field and in the research that exists so far, this is where it ends. People think that brainwave authentication, it means only one thing, that brainwaves are unique to every person, meaning mine are different from yours. And that is the tip of the iceberg. In fact, it's not enough to say that you can flick your finger and it's unique, or you can flick your tongue and it's unique, or you can think of a cup and it's unique to you versus to me. But that's hardly enough. There are questions about, will it be unique in the same way over time? And okay, my thought triggered with the same trigger versus your thoughts with probably the same trigger will be different. What about my thoughts versus my thoughts? What about my thoughts versus some other thought of yours? Now, that is a bit of a problem. If I use the word cup and I'm thinking of Stanley Cup, but then I am using the word cup and I'm thinking of a coconut cup, in my own brain, biometry is probabilistic. So, up to where is my thought sufficiently different from a thought of my own? If I am in assisted living and somebody who takes care of me knows that the password is cup, and they decide to trigger my brain by showing me what they think a cup is, will it be the same? So my password might be my Stanley Cup, and you show me a cup by the competitor in the color of your choice. Can you make my brain authenticate? Imagine if it's a paralyzed person. The second that something like this happens, then you have bypassed the entire authentication. Why is emotion important? Well, because even if you do something like this, and I am paralyzed and you are trying to trigger my brain, then I will probably be in an emotional state of agitation. So if I am trying to authenticate, but we're seeing some sudden panickiness, then we might ask for some further questions. Authentication does not mean, is it unique? It means, is it securely unique? It means you have to negotiate between the 1234 password, which is a hand motion. And with this, we would be long done with any authentication. It does not disclose information about you. It's stable, it's relatively safe, it's also all over the place. Versus a memory, which gives you a huge password space, but it has all these variations where you have to handle, in fact, a hierarchy of knowledge. You are in a space of concepts that relate to other concepts that appear in your mind in relation to a mental context that you do not always know how you're processing it. Through your memories, do you go as if it's a film scene? Do you go as if it's a picture? Or are you processing it as a sentence? How is your reasoning happening through a memory? What comes into your mind, in fact? Are you going to see also the table that was on the cup? Are you going to see your grandmother? Are you going to see the drink that was in the cup? Where does it end? So, what is the cup that you just remembered? If we are talking emotion and if we are talking memory, then automatically you are creating huge security breaches. Why? Because you tell me automatically about yourself what is important about you. Whom do you care about? What do you love? How it affects you? What is your current emotional state? Possibly health information. And if I happen to be your employer, then we enter the area of illegal consultation. So I think the US has this legislation, it's called ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. And there was a trial where a nurse had made mistakes for some reason at work, and her employer requested that she do a psychological evaluation and follow psychotherapy. And in short, she sued them and won, because you cannot mandate any consultation on your staff unless it is really necessary. So the extra information that can be derived from such a brain print, since it has access to your brain, it enters a very delicate negotiation with how to anonymize the data, how and by whom it is stored and under what legislation, Who is authorized to share what? Is it encrypted? Is it anonymized? How is the computing done? Where is the computing done? On whose equipment is it done? Let us assume that I were to deploy, since I am from Europe, I were to deploy something like this for the city hall or some public service that is for pensioners, where I want to prove that they are still alive and they can still receive their pension. And I want to use equipment that is made in Taiwan. Taiwan is not in the EU. Taiwan does not have to answer to GDPR. Taiwan does not listen to European legislation, and the manufacturers want, even if you deploy a secure system, allegedly, within the limits of whoever you are, the government, the employer, the hospital, if you are buying your equipment from Taiwan and your sensitive medical data is going in a cloud in North Korea, just kidding. Those are third parties that, well, may or may not listen to you. Then again, it's the manufacturer is highly responsible because so far, neuroscience has been staying in the lab for quite a while so far. The systems, they're not necessarily designed for secure use. They're designed for experimental, for we know we're going to be safe. And even at the worst of the worst, if they are so much consumer oriented, it's still for something like neuromarketing or gaming or navigation. They are not necessarily preoccupied how many accounts you have and with whom you share them. And just by studying the entire ecosystem of manufacturers, I think in my own research, I've come up with quite a few data breaches. Right now, the manufacturers are a huge bottleneck. And to do authentication, it would mean a collaboration between the provider of the software, the solution, and the manufacturers, because implicitly, they are the ones who need to give the support, the hardware support, and they would be integrated within any government entity. Now, how bad can this get? Very bad. You can have profiling. You can have profiling on large populations. You can have your medical data sold. You can have your data tampered with. There's emerging legislation on the usage of brain-computer interfaces in court. And there's starting to be quite a bit of, I can count it on my fingers, on both hands. I think there are that many publications that say something about it. But in, I think, South America, they are starting these tentative legislation pieces on whether or not you can use it as judicial proof, as a polygraph. There are PhD theses in the US on the same topic, and they discuss like the proof of the right to use this. It goes all the way, I think, to the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So the idea would be that as long as you can prove that indeed measurably this is secure, you can use the brainwave to prove something in court. Think along the lines of somebody having witnessed a crime, knowing where it happened, people knowing that he knows where it happened, but they do not want to say. Well, then P300 comes in very handy. You can simply hope for an aha moment and play the film. Think of levels of abstraction. What I was saying earlier. You have the same recognition of a robot portrait, and again, your brain will react. But from here, from the aha moment, from the I am a terrorist and somebody knows that I know somebody in a crowd and I can identify them, and then I am guilty of knowing the head of the terrorist organization. I know where the murder happened. I don't want to tell, but that is where it happened. It's the same as with authentication. Very well, you have a brain reaction. How do we know it's your brain reaction? How do we know it is not replayed? How do we know it is not extracted by coercion? How do we know that the device and the software ecosystem of the whatever manufacturer provided the hardware has not been tampered with, which is surprisingly easy? And then you might have something which, according to the entire legislative area of legal right to use BCI as evidence, then again, you have an exceptionally tamperable piece of evidence. That on top of the fact that, okay, it's still an emerging technology, it has the psychological impact of, I can read your brain. So not every person in the world is aware of what BCI is not, can do, cannot do. There are people, and your standard criminal did not go to Cornell, maybe. The scare impact, the power given to the investigator becomes exponential. And so you have a piece of evidence that is not signed, that you don't know how the person is feeling when it was extracted, that you don't know what the hardware and the rest of ecosystem was doing and how insecure it was. But technically, legally, there could be a way to use it, and the legislation around it could be built. And I think it is being built. So this is where authentication comes in. If you are doing a legal deposition, then you should sign your deposition. We should know it's from you. We should know you are fine when you were saying that. And you should be able to sign. So here, security becomes extremely important, the security of the system. And so far, what I mentioned is legislation and basically software security. But what happens when I literally attack your hardware? Authentication, you cannot speak of it and usage of brainwaves without taking into account all the possible attack mechanisms on the data, on the hardware, on the person, either psychologically or by literally attacking the data.
And Violeta, maybe you can provide some examples of how the hardware and software and then the person can be, how people can tamper with all of those three components. Just, some examples that can give us an idea of how this can be done.
A very basic thing would be jamming. Right now, we are working on some attacks on implantable devices mostly, but also on standard BCIs, the EEG. You can try to simply jam it. Some of the manufacturers have some flaws, some rather large software flaws that are simply errors by design and could be solved so easily, but they chose. I think they simply didn't take it into account. We are trying magnetic field attacks, and the rest is to come out. Right now, the work is on the current project is on implants. And what we're doing is we are using a software-defined radio and a logger in order to intercept the communication. And we are trying to rewrite the parameters of the implant so that, for instance, if the DBS is for pain or for whatever it is, we might try to induce slightly altered moods in you, or pain, or simply to disrupt it completely. The other thing is literally attacking the mind with magnetic fields. So far, we've been doing some preliminary work about how we could create something that looks like your headset, but made of a magnetic field. So it's a bit the reverse of your standard BCI. we are trying to put like a Lego piece magnetically that could disrupt your emotional patterns. And so far, we are detecting the size of the animal that we could use in order to be at the adequate distance and still have proper impact. The mouse does not cut it, apparently. We're considering a rat or a pig.
Yes. Violeta, when you are talking about this, as just a simple consumer of the technology, it's very difficult to even imagine that somebody would want to tamper with a neurotechnology. How feasible is it really to tamper with it? What would be the motivation behind that? Because what you are saying to me sounds like absolutely science fiction, but I understand that it's not, because you are a serious person and there are serious people working to solve all these possible problems. So maybe you can just give some insights as to how serious can this really be.
Well, in the group where I work, has been already tampering with pacemakers. So the idea is if you unfortunately have to use one, it can be shut off. And that was done. I think one of the US politicians, Secretary of State or something, actually had it disabled through the duration of their tenure, specifically because it was insecure and they knew that some interested party could give them a heart attack. For the manufacturers and the medical staff, sometimes they have to leave security behind because of emergency, because it has to function. So the increased security would actually stop it from doing its job. So you have the choice of actually accepting an insecure device that might save your life, or well, you're secure, but also you're not treated. For the brain implants, there has been another project. So they have been hacked into once in the department. And meanwhile, the manufacturers have patched said problems, mostly. Now we're trying to do take two on it and see how we can bypass encryption and pretty much ruin what they solved. For the non-invasive BCIs, so far I would say the flaws come from design, software design, basically. But we're still trying to see how much damage we can do. Why? Imagine that you are a politician. Imagine that you are some person of interest in the military or wherever you are. If you are wearing any implantable devices, we would like to know how much damage they can do to you. And of course, how it can be mitigated. And the same thing is another area that I focus on because when I'm talking about my idea of authentication and its predictive analysis, which is meant mostly for sensitive resources, you are analyzing the individual, but you're also analyzing the group. And when you're analyzing the group, you have a collective mind that is responsive to poisoned water, to viruses, and I don't know what, but also to poisoned words, to the propaganda and the games and the sources is mind prints, meaning that you have in the world these minds that operate. And these minds, they embody themselves in various NGOs, companies, whatever type of entities you can think of. And they embody themselves as very inconspicuous identities that you would not suspect. You want to identify these minds and understand their impact, the impact of the messages that they communicate, and understand their emotional print and what they do on a collective mind. You want to be able to give your leadership, government, whatever, the capacity to measure the impact of the wave of toxins that can come from these external minds so that you can sense when a rebellion might form. So this is what I was saying about sensitive elements in brain prints, in brainwave authentication. Because if you tell your users that, in fact, what you want to do is authenticate them with their brains to measure fatigue, but in fact you're measuring other stuff, you could start talking state security versus individual rights versus secure passwords. So security-wise, it escalates exponentially according to where exactly is it being used. In a military context, like this, I don't have to mention what is happening in the world right now, because we all know there's some warfare happening in a certain part towards the east, let's say. And we have seen that there's a lot of interest about the morale of the troops, and in authoritarian governments, that interest can take a very colorful turns. And that can lead to your imprisonment or worse. So if you are a soldier and by chance your government has decided to monitor your brain, you don't know where you might end up. And it can be a bit fatal for you. Then again, maybe you, as a state, maybe it is good to know if your soldier is about to defect or sell something, or they don't really believe in you. If you are just a school and you're doing little old online exams, again, what can come out of that authentication? Can I learn about the performance of the professors? Can I learn about if a certain student is being bullied? Or am I going to profile them for mental conditions? In which case, as a school, I'm going to say, I am University of something, and I want all of my students, I don't want autistic students. I don't want bipolar students. And the part where I was talking about the silent brain password, the fact that, okay, you can authenticate with a concept on the good ERP style, trigger, response, and we know where it is, how big it is, and that's it. What can I decode from your brain is a question. Now, that's where crypto comes in. Because my personal experiments, there are actually multiple experiments, there's quite a lot of them. But one of them, we take persons through a series of 23 emotional states. And for each emotional state, they have an associated memory through which they pinpoint some zooms, we call them, trigger words, that it's like cinematically the zoom of the camera. It's a focus point that we know is going to be always there. We use them as linguistic trigger words. We lead the person in the emotional state gently, and they sit there in a semi-trance, thinking from one zoom to the other of the semantic connections. So they literally walk through their mind. Now, from a cryptographic point of view, and this is philosophy and crypto, what I was saying, the first thing is, in your mind, there is a language of the mind. But it's not a language like a formal language with rules. It's what I would call a Davidsonian language, where you kind of prove it by its ability to go on as before. You have an endless amount of concepts in your mind, and the fact that it is a language is proved through the other person. So although I might be speaking my own language, my own brain language, and you're speaking yours, we understand each other through our triangulation with an object. If I name the object and you name the object, and we know both that we're referring to the object exists and it is a word in the language. And we understand that we are both speaking a language through the fact that it goes on as before. It's the same thing that happens with the brain language. It is a code. I am translating it into a code that is a code because it goes on as before, that has points through it, known points. We know what the emotion looks like. We know what the concepts out of emotion look like. And then we know that the concepts tainted with emotion are sitting with a stretch of semantic connections between them. So we have something that we can decode, an unknown stretch of language that we kind of know what it's about. So we can identify semantic elements and then the endpoint. And what we're trying to do is decode this piece so that we can isolate the concepts, but also understand the pathway from one to the other. So for that, we've created a very large neuroontology of emotion, of concepts that are emotionally colored. And it's a huge ontology. It's about 500 hours of recording and still going on. What if we can correctly decode to a good extent, like good little cryptographers, that unknown piece? Well, that means that the second that you have a headset on, we can start decoding your free thoughts. That means that not only if you're authenticating, but if you are brainwave anythinging, we might start being able to understand what is it that you're thinking of. Again, in the context of a school or the military, how far do we want this to happen? What will be the secure processing mechanisms so that I can feel confident that when I am using your whatever brainware, it is safe and you will not dig through my mind in unwanted places? Because it's very reassuring when you say, oh no, I'm doing ERPs. Oh no, it's a P300. Oh no, I'm not looking elsewhere than where I'm saying I'm looking. That's fine, right? Well, maybe not. So my experiments, the chain of them, go into the ability to kind of decode this unknown piece of terrain. In order to support this, I do experiments on image understanding. So they get sequences of images that need to connect and understand. They get pieces of programming tasks so that we understand stuff like decision, if, while, for, like the numeric part of the mind. We do aha moments, meaning they get a task, and on the task they are flashed related and unrelated elements so that they kind of recompose the sentence. There's a lot of them. Then we're doing the war games. The war games are related to the injection of content into a group so that we see how much we can detect the effect of propaganda, of like what are the limits and what can we say about the person when a flow of dissent, of intentions to create, doing this in micro states. Like I've invented some little republics made of 5 to 10 people that act as republics, which we try to destabilize based on the attacking of the so-called leadership. So we're playing government with BCIs. The idea is to see what are the effective messages. Of course, there are elements also like syntactic ambiguity, semantic ambiguity, which we try to include. Levels of abstraction, like we do experiments on seeing up to what point you can still recognize an abstraction of a concept. Anything and everything that will allow you to accurately decode the elements that constitute a thought. So in order to see up to what point we can start breaking into the uncharted thought. without asking you P300 or ERP, and even without you necessarily, like, you could just be unwillingly sitting there with a BCI on your head and you'd be thinking. And we would like to know, what are you thinking about? Even though it's not the stimulation paradigm. So think interrogation. Investigation. You do not want to tell the investigator anything. You're just sitting and thinking, refusing to communicate. That's nice. Well, we would like to know what you're thinking of. And this is where cryptography comes in, because the idea in the huge database is that the concepts are related and they have semantic dimensions and they are related through semantic fields. And that's why we do so much experimenting on synonyms, on levels of, on hierarchies, on abstraction, on the emotion and not the emotion, in order to be able to capture the elements that create a word in your brain and say that, okay, I don't know what is it that you're thinking of, but it's somewhere around here. It's in this sphere of words. So I don't know if you're thinking of a cup, but you're definitely thinking of a recipient, of a vessel. You're not thinking of a car, but you're thinking of traveling. So that kind of gives insight into what your thought might be. Another thing is that there is the element of stability. So I'm doing algorithms that are meant to increase the stability. They're nice and stretchy. And even though you will not have perfect classification, you will be able to know how close it gets to what it should get. So we take into account the possible fluctuations and mechanisms in your mind, because you will still remember your cup with the teddy bear. For some moment, it might come back to your active memory. You have to be able to say that that was still you. That is still a thought from you. It's yours. It's valid. Now, manifests, all of this translates into a lot of experiments for stability and cognitive processes that we want to be able to capture the mind and its nuances, so that we can say, when I'm telling you that you're using a concept to authenticate, and what you're authenticating into and how you're authenticating into it, it is indeed acceptable. It's safe, it's secure. We're not going where we shouldn't be going. We're not going to fake it. It's signed. We're not going to inject it from a different device. We're not going to tamper with it. Then there's the clinical testing, because a brain that has had an AVC, or an epileptic brain, or an autistic brain, or a bipolar brain just might be a little bit different, especially after an AVC or in epilepsy. The changes are structural. So, of course, you need to understand how that would work. There's the neuroontology of concepts with memory and emotion and without emotion, the algorithms, decryption that we need to see how far it goes, and digital signatures. And then there is the language of the mind that I'm trying to talk about, where we have semantic dimensions and a dictionary and rules and knowledge representation and ambiguity. And we simply try to decode as much as possible from a free-flowing thought. Further, it goes into the collective mind. Basically, it's about breaking into it or breaking it. When it comes to the individual mind, you can break into it as in read it. You can break it by pushing messages or by destabilizing emotion. It's the same with the collective mind. And you can do it in various ways. You can do it soft style by messaging. You can do it brute force style by attacking brainware. And right now we have TMS. There's an interesting project that was in Nature. It's called BrainNet, where they actually managed to create a mini internet of humans The mini internet of humans meant 3 people connected by BCI and TMS that were playing a game, and you could move the hands of a person with the brain of another. Now, this is probably going to happen at concept level as well. So the point will come when we move into a collective mind, into a hive mentality. So we're going to have distributed computing systems made of brains. Distributed computing systems made of brains mean that I would be able to write a concept or more concepts from my mind to yours. And at some point, I might be able to move my personal language of the mind into your body. So that translates into one, this blended consciousness, and two, into eternal life. Means that I would be body hopping from my body to your body to another body, possibly capturing pieces of your mind along the way and living forever. So this is how BCI ends up in reincarnation and improving eternity. The fact that you can alter it, who can alter it, who can write it where, and who can rewrite it, and how much can be captured of this eternally generative minds, in fact. This is still to be determined. Probably it's not going to be the TMS. It's going to be some grandchild of the TMS, much as modern BCIs are a bit different than the first ones in the 80s. But in all likelihood, we're going to email from one consciousness to the other, whatever that might be. We will brain to brain email. But in the meanwhile, I'm having fun, I suppose, leading the whatever type of lab I am allegedly leading, trying to capture minds and understand them. It's such a huge field, and there are so many elements of it. You can always just capture little pieces. But I think this kind of describes what I'm generally up to.
Yeah, yeah. So many insights and so much information that is fairly new. Maybe you can just briefly summarize the results that you have so far already from your own studies that you conducted.
The summary of my endeavors is leading the incipient form of a research lab that has multiple research directions. The most active one is brainwave authentication with predictive analysis and emotion for the simple purposes of giving you a way to authenticate and sign with your brain. The others are derived, meaning that in order to do this, you have to understand mechanisms of the brain and you have to understand how far exactly can things go and what are the variants of this authentication. So we go experiments in order to be able to decode the brain. And then there are hardware attacks and magnetic field attacks and some war games. So these are the main directions. The brainwave authentication is the most advanced. We've done so far experiments over 2 years. So on the same persons, like there is a group of over 100 volunteers. Each of them was recorded for about 9 to 18 hours. So there is a total of 500 hours of recording on multiple experiments that twist the mind as much as possible. The pilot studies say yes. There is still a lot of development going on. So the final results should be coming in. There's a lot to develop, starting from the accurate algorithms to defining what is the proper security context. So far there's been a lot of work that's unpublished. I have been gathering work for 2 years now, piling the pile. We are preparing to start the clinical testing on the disabled persons so that we know what the AVC brain looks like. On the implant attacks, they are ongoing. So we did some proto testing last year. And this year we're doing the hands-on stuff. So right now it is in attack mode. We're effectively breaking into them. Because I work with BCI, I've had the joy of understanding what the systems look like and what the software looks like and what the vulnerabilities are like. So I did some threat modeling and about the flaws and breach points of and we've started the war games. So the ongoing experiments right now are the programming tasks, syntactic, semantic ambiguity, and the war games, where we try to inject messages. As for the magnetic field attacks, we're trying them, but it's kind of hard to hit where you should because of like a mouse is small and you cannot really hit the mouse right. So right now we're adjusting what we are intending to do so that we can have something that is closer to a human brain, but still, we don't want to torture any animals. Of course, there's the problem of, is it really an emotion? The researchers at KU Leuven, they were telling me that, yes, you can inhibit fear, but is fear an emotion in an animal? So this is still an area where I have a lot of questions, like the magnetic field attacks, because I am claiming that I am altering emotions and that I can do it. But also there are people who say that, well, do animals actually have emotions, and which animals have emotions and what emotions? So that's a little difficult there. It's been a lot of your work over years in pushing every part of everything I've been telling you. It's a one-woman orchestra kind of thing. There are collaborators, there are students, there's my little staff, but still we're in diapers to a certain extent. We're doing things, but there's still a huge pile of work to be further done. And I only have 2 hands and 1 brain. But as I've been following the field and as I understand the evolution, I think that what I am doing will grow. It's still not ready, but if you look at the past 10 years, the hardware, the BCIs have changed massively. It's not what it was when I started doing brain-computer interfacing. And it will be even more ubiquitous. So we will enter a world when the brain-computer interface will be the same as your iPhone. And you will need authentication. You will have many more applications. You will need not just to state that your credential is a credential, that my cup is not your cup, but you'll have to prove to me that in order to let you handle my money with my brain, my cup with the teddy bear is different from my cup today and is different from the cup that Milena is showing me because she wants to enter my bank account. So all of these need to be proven. They need to be securely proven. So other than the effective, let's do signal processing and let's do little experiments part, there is the let's understand the legislation and how ready is the market and how ready are authorities to accept this and who should be speaking to whom and in what context. Because it would be absolutely wonderful, for instance, if the government of Belgium would accept for their people who have hemiparalysis, who are old and cannot move so easily, instead of going to prove that they are alive with their pension, or instead of having their nurse do stuff for them, they could do government operations, through its me and everything with their brain securely. Then there are the manufacturers who need to be ready, and it's not random manufacturers. there are a lot of producers of BCIs. If it is to be accepted as a European project, for instance, it has to be from a manufacturer who can align to European legislation, who can guarantee that they are functioning safely and they respect the GDPR, the rights of the user. And then there will be the liability. What if the authentication fails? What if my brain signature has failed? Okay, I am a paralyzed grandma with Alzheimer, and the authentication does not work. Who's at fault? Was it Violeta for developing the algorithms, which she sold? Is it GTech because we know that their equipment glitched? Is it the integrator? Is it the identity provider? Who is going to manage these passwords? Who is going to leak them? From where? So who's going to take the blame? That's the question. Where will the liabilities lie? So no, brainwave authentication, is this unique or not? We got that. It's unique. Our brains are unique. How are they safely unique? That's a very different question.
Yeah, so many questions still to answer. I think you have already a work lined up in front of you for the whole life, and you are doing absolutely amazing job. About GTEC, you mentioned it as example, and now we know that GTEC's equipment is of very high quality, and hopefully with it we will not have any glitches. So I just want to mention that. Are you planning to provide certain recommendations, certain standards to the software, to the hardware of the BCI manufacturers so that it would be maximally secured for any breaches, for any tampering?
This time, GTEC was not actually the culprit. Normally, I think there is some sort of a procedure at the university where if you find some caca in something, you have to kind of notify them and allow them to fix it. And I have not notified them. The manufacturers of BCI, and I'm not referring to one, obviously have taken into account lab use, or at most a person who has like one device, two devices, and maybe they buy like a shared account or whatever purchasing options they have. And it's fine because it's just them. For me, the problems were when we scaled up the team. When it was just myself with my devices, I felt fine. When it was myself with a team of 30 students and 100 volunteers working on multiple devices, sharing stuff with the fact that they shared a schedule and they were entering and exiting through the same doors. And also there had to be a management system of informed consents. Things got hectic. So they're making the software which was for the management of informed consents, which obviously you have to handle. It would be good, like if the manufacturers maybe could integrate something like this into the solutions, because obviously I'm using your software, and your hardware, what am I using it for? Obviously, if I might not be using it at home, once it's a scaled up experiment and it's with the university and it has to integrate with this, that, and whatnot, then I might want something in one place. Then there's how the data is stored and all of the defaults in some stuff, which creates security breaches. Again, mostly because they were thought for lab use, and strictly in labs, it's not a problem. Once you are doing things in a different way, it becomes a huge problem. Also, like, they were developed for my laptop is my laptop and it belongs to me. Unfortunately, my laptop is not my laptop. It's multiple laptops. It's a lab of laptops. And they don't belong to me. And there are other entities having access. The data breaches are all over the place. The thing that we have done was to install a policy in the lab where we make all of our people not whisper a word about whatever they do, because other than that, to secure more than that, we cannot change the software that we're using. So no, BCIs are not secure at all. And then there's noise. They are meant, again, for lab conditions. The fact that you have electromagnetic interference, right? Well, I'm authenticating with my brain with a device that doesn't allow me this. What if I'm in a connected hospital room and I'm authenticating to this? What do we do? So here, it's not me to say what happens. It's more other people to say what happens. And how do we create robust BCIs? At KU, there is a one right now being developed that's meant for outdoor usage and is more like noise friendly, I guess. But it's young, I think.
Yes, of course, people are now definitely thinking about the real world applications and uses in natural environment. So uses of BCIs, and I know at GTech we have a special Oscar algorithm that really is helping to get rid of any artifacts and maintain the signal. But I think it's a general already movement towards that. So there are little steps that are being made, and even quite big steps that are being made in that direction. But yes, I absolutely agree with you. There are so many questions still to be resolved. And because we have a career-oriented podcast, I would like to ask you, what would be your suggestions to those who are planning maybe to join this type of work, this type of research regarding a secure use of BCIs and brainwave authentication? So what would be your recommendations? And maybe they would be joining the field of BCI from the information security field.
They should probably understand that it's an interdisciplinary field. So far, I have seen so many people who join on the principle of I am a security expert and I'm going to capture those brainwaves and I'm going to put on them the roughest, toughest algorithms I have. And no, they fail miserably because they don't understand anything about the brain. They don't even ask themselves the questions. And they produce wonderfully crafted algorithms for something like baselines. We'll never authenticate with a baseline because it's all over the place. They don't know where to go in the brain and they don't understand the field. Then there are the bio, neuro, etc. The people who come from the medical-ish fields, who the second they see a brain signal, they do what the security people do. They grab a statistic and they hit that signal with the statistic until it's dead. And they don't understand how to design systems. So what they do is very cute little statistics. Sometimes they even flex their muscles, and we have some examples at KU, and they put it on the quantum computer. And they do the deep learning. And then they come up with creative solutions. I will not give names. It's about tongue flicks. So this one comes from Neuro. Would you stick your tongue out in front of an ATM? No, right? I mean, from a neuro perspective, it's fine. Yeah. But do you want to be like with your tongue out from usability perspective? No. Do you often imagine how you flip your tongue to your left molar? No. That's the problem there. That is the creativity of the neuro guys. So if you don't understand security, stay away from authentication. But if you're pure security, do understand that the brain is a big place. And then I usually get slapped about my philosophical hobbies. But the problem is that the mind is a mind, it's consciousness, it's reasoning. You cannot speak of a mind without understanding what is language. What is language of the mind? What is a mind? What is reasoning? And how do you translate? Philosophy is the point where you do the translation between the crypto and the neuro. The neuro is empirical, it's measurements. The crypto is pure abstraction. The philosophy is just in between. It ties them up. Of course, you can do authentication either being one or the other or whatever. And then we end up with tongue clicks. Let's authenticate with the tongue. Or with baselines. Why not? For me, it's been dedicated work of over 10 years now, working on this. And I started by breaking into a psychiatry hospital. So when I was a young researcher, starting my PhD, we did not have GTech or any tech. So my father broke into a hospital of psychiatry and bribed nurses and allowed me to use the hospital equipment after hours. So we were literally villains breaking into public institutions. I had to self-fund. A lot of my career shifted and winded and expanded because I was always hunting for money, because it's a very expensive sport. They should also probably be ready for the expenses. Myself, I don't think I could have ever afforded to do what I'm doing without KU Leuven behind me. I've had to change to universities to do my current projects. So this is PhD number 2. And it's very difficult to explain to someone why for your authentication projects, it's a team of you plus 30. It's one salary plus 30 more, plus an entire lab equipped and licensed and volunteers. And it's 2 years going on 10. Because the other part of the logic is, let's do experiments for like 2 months, and we are going to consider it a significant data set. And then you can do banking because Jimmy from neuroscience did 12 people for 1 hour, and he thinks he's authenticating into something. No, you didn't. And then, okay, you can do it as a theoretical topic, right? You can say, okay, I'm a neuroscientist or I'm a cryptographer or whatever I am going to do authentication, right? Great. In my early years, it was mission impossible because I was a 20-year-old master's student and then a 20-year-old PhD student without any specific connections. And the feeling was I am lost at the bottom of the sea. Who's going to see me? I don't have equipment. I'm breaking into hospitals. I'm mooching for money everywhere. Nobody understands what I'm doing. Oh my God. 10 years later at KU Leuven, well, KU Leuven is close to Brussels at least. It's somewhere center of Europe. It's important to do the research. Fine, you're going to do the research. You're going to put years into it. And possibly you're still not going to feel that you have work to do before you can publish your results. But then it's who's going to pick up your results. It's the patenting. Even if you do the company, you do the spin-off based on your patent and on your work, then you need to reach the right vectors so that it starts getting put into practice. It gets adopted, and in what conditions it gets adopted, and how do you make it viable? Creating a company just as a company is not such a big deal. You know, you go and you configure yourself as a company, great. But from company to successful company that can secure continued funding, that guarantees that this is the correct solution, in fact, that's very different. And that's why I was talking to you about the need to work in tandem with the manufacturers. They each have their target market, and they have the advantage of the reputation and the accuracy. So the disadvantages, we know them. They're in the pricier part. But if you do not need a million BCIs, but rather you need the accuracy and you want to have the warranty of the name, then you would go for a GTEC and sell authentication with GTEC. Think legal, think investigation. I don't want to be investigated with an insecure device. If it's something like I'm already a BCI user because I'm paralyzed and I just want to enhance my life and I want to play video games and go into my brain world and do stuff and browse the internet. I can browse the internet with something else and authenticate to my email. It's okay. I've sent an email. Fine. We broke into it. Fine. It didn't work. Fine. So it's understanding what's it for, understanding with whom it is partnered, and having the power behind it, the warranty, that not the baseline, not a random concept that somebody recorded once and low. So it's understanding the limitations, and it's also having the right platform and the points through which to communicate this, to implement it. I'm not going to start presenting my promoter now. I think he's presented himself enough all over the media. But usually understanding like more than just the ground security, like that we are exponentiating something. It's also having the voice and the capacity to push your solution and prove that it is a correct solution and understand it.
Thank you very much, Violeta, for this very thought-provoking conversation. Yes, there is so much to think about on this topic. As we're nearing the end of our podcast, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners? Any advice? So anything, it's your time.
Uh, Thank you first for inviting me. It was really, really a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed being able to talk about my research. If from your listeners find my work interesting, of course, I would be very, very happy to hear from them and clarify whatever needs to be clarified if they have questions or whatever. If there are volunteers, people who would like to participate in the experiments, we are still ongoing. So feel free to reach out. We've had volunteers from all over the world.
Thank you very much, Violeta. It's been a great pleasure having you, and we're looking forward to your updates. I hope it's not the last episode that we recorded with you. It would be really, really very interesting to follow up after some time and hear your updates and new information that is coming from your lab and in general in the world what's going on in the field. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, thank you for joining me and my incredible guests on this exciting journey into careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. I hope you've been inspired by the stories of those turning groundbreaking ideas into impactful realities. If you are looking for more guidance on advancing your neurocareer, book a free consultation with me, Dr. K, your podcast host and neurocareers coach at the Institute of Neuroapproaches, the only career service dedicated specifically to the needs of professionals in neurotech. Let's take the next step toward your neurocareer success together. In addition to free consultations, the Institute of Neuroapproaches offers a variety of services designed to help you thrive in neurotech. First, professional development planning. We help you create a tailored career development plan, identify knowledge gaps, and equip you with the tools needed to achieve your goals in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Second, resume and cover letter review. Get expert feedback on how to craft documents that are specifically designed for job opportunities in the neurotech field. Third, interview preparation. Sharpen your interview skills through mock interviews and targeted feedback, including soft skills, hard skills in neurotech, BCIs, EG, MEG, live coding, and presentation preparation. 4. Networking and job search strategy. Learn how to effectively network and uncover job opportunities while standing out in the competitive neurotech job market. 5. Negotiation and salary advice. Receive expert guidance on negotiating salaries and benefits and determining a fair salary range for your desired position. All this and more can be found at www.neuroapproaches.org. Again, www.neuroapproaches.org. So, what are you waiting for? Let's navigate the path to success in the world of neurocareers together and turn the impossible into possible. We're looking forward to working with you.